everybody, welcome to the HTDOC, the show where we talk about how to do online church. I'm Reverend Jim Keat, the digital minister at the Riverside Church and the director of online innovation at Convergence. And in this episode, we're going to talk about the difference between church online and online church. Oh, whoa, we're going deep. Well, trust me, we actually are. This might sound like just a semantic argument, but it is so much more than that. Let's take a look and break this down together. So, when the whole pandemic started, I don't know about you, but I talked a lot with a lot of people about church online. This was just the way the phrase kind of stumbled out of my mouth, March 2020. Many of us, we've been doing this internet thing with church before the pandemic, but that was really the moment when so many of us were pushed into the deep end of this brave new world. And this is just kind of how it kind of felt natural to talk about it. But then it was a few months into it, I think around August 2020, I was having a conversation with a group of students from Duke Divinity School. And we started the conversation with this phrase, church online, but somehow along the way, the words flipped. We talked about online church. And I began thinking, whoa, that's actually a completely different thing we're talking about now. Because you see, when you talk about church online, you're just talking about where church is happening. Where is church happening today? Is it happening, in the basement? Is it happening in the backyard? Is it happening in the sanctuary? Oh, it's happening online. It's the where of the question. But when you flip these, when it becomes online church, now we're talking about how church is happening. This is no longer just the where, but this impacts the experience entirely. This context suddenly has made its way from beginning to end into the entire thing. It's very easy and common and maybe even necessary to begin by just copying what we're used to doing in person and just pasting it online, by regurgitating our in-person liturgies and putting them on the internet. But I think the necessary move is to reimagine our liturgies, to reimagine what it means to gather as a people of faith and for worship in these online spaces. That, to me, is the move from church online, just kind of take what we're used to and put it on the internet, to online church. Reimagine it for this new context. And I think, let's kind of parallel this in a different kind of setting. If your church, your congregation, your community suddenly, boom, was no longer able to meet in your building, and it's gorgeous weather, and you meet in the park for like a year. Ooh, it's gorgeous weather all year long. You must live in, I don't know, Las Palmas, Spain. Maybe the first few weeks, you might just kind of generally take the same basic structure of what you're used to and put it into this new location. But over time, that location is going to impact how you gather and the language you use and the experiences you facilitate and what it is that you do for so many inevitable reasons. You'll be sitting in a different position. You might be in a round rather than just staring at the backs of people's heads. You're going to be feeling the sun or the elements and seeing nature around you. So you're going to talk about those things. You're going to naturally use the context to reimagine the way that you gather. Now, I think the internet is the same thing. We start with church online. We take what we're used to and just plop it on the internet. Online church invites us to rethink the context, to rethink what we end up doing with this particular context in mind so that it can grow more naturally out of it. The goal isn't just to take church as we've done it and put it on the internet. No, that's the past, and we can't go back to it. We must say, what is the world we're living in? Where are the people gathering? And how do we do this thing called church, maybe even just the worship service part of it, in that environment? That's what I think is the difference between, just online church. Where is it happening? That, I think, is the difference between church online, where we just talk about where it's happening, and online church, where we talk about how it's happening. So let's kind of begin bringing the plane down. That's way up here in, esoteric theoretical land, which is important. Let's not get that wrong, but let's bring that down a few 100 feet or so and talk about how do we do that? How do we make the move from church online to online church? Here's what I think. An important thing you can start by doing is just learn about the online platform that you're using. You see, we've got a lot of time and experience and just education pumped into us about how to do it in these physical spaces. Literally, that's what seminaries and, our field education and internships, they've all typically helped us understand, is how to do the whole in-person church thing, where to stand, pulpits, lecterns, all the stuff. But to make the move to the online space, you need to start by learning about the online platform that you're using. So if you're using Zoom for your online church, well, then maybe you should spend a lot of time actually getting to know the platform, not just kind of the surface, but what actually is it capable of? What are the new things they're developing? How can you just really know that system from end to end? The culture of the kinds of gatherings that happen and ways in which we use that platform. Or if you're on Facebook Live or YouTube, same kind of a thing. You need to learn to know about that online platform. Just how does it work? Why does it work? How do people already use this space so that we can then show up in it with an understanding about the platform and lead appropriately. That's the first thing. Second thing, you can visit other churches' online worship services and events. You don't just have to make it all up yourself, assuming it's all going to work perfectly just because you maybe thought of an idea. No, you can spend time getting to know what other people are already doing. What are the things that are already happening? And this is tricky because we're all busy people. But this would mean you have to schedule some time to go check out someone else's church service or someone else's Bible study, which, believe it or not, might actually be good for you to get a little time when you're not the one always producing and leading the thing, but just getting to be nourished by others. But you go in with this mindset of what are they doing and how are they doing it and why are they doing it, so you can then come back with those ideas. We do this all the time in our in-person gatherings. I mean, we always get ideas for like, oh, I saw that person do this thing and I'm going to try that, or I'm going to borrow this idea. It's just implicit in how we've gathered over the millennia in person. But this online stuff, it feels so new, we haven't quite got there yet. But I think we need to be intentional about doing that same process of observing and learning and reverse engineering and understanding so our context can benefit as well. And then third, as we move our plane down towards the ground, a third thing you can do is try something new. This might not mean you just do the thing you've always done. You're not just trying to do with church the way you've always done it in an online space, but you can try something new in these online spaces. Now, I will recommend trying something new is great, but perhaps try it first in private before you try it in public. Maybe you can go ahead and try it. No, you should try it in private first. Like if you're trying something on Zoom, great, but maybe get 3-4 friends together and try it out there first, just so you can have a little space to say, how'd that go? How did it work? What was the experience like? Could you see? Could you hear? The stuff that we would do, in person as well. You typically do a sound check before people show up. It's the same kind of a thing. Or if your church is installing a sound system for the very first time, you're probably going to take like a whole weekend and just learn how the thing works and try it out. You're not going to just go like, okay, let's plug stuff in and see. So simple stuff, try something new, but, try it out in a safe space, and then boldly try it out with your congregation. I think it's great. Okay, now let's bring this plane all the way down. We're going to talk about some very specific things you can do. First, using Zoom for online church. A lot of people, this is their platform. This is how church services happen. The whole thing revolves. The pandemic, we really moved into Zoom. And then the trick comes when we try to go back into our physical spaces and do a hybrid thing. Zoom becomes hard for that. That's a whole other conversation. But if you are using Zoom for your online church, or you anticipate using it in the future, here are a few ideas that I just want to impart or chat with you about. So, very tactical things. First, when you're on Zoom, everyone can see everyone. This is a unique piece of the context. This is different than when you're in person in a physical space. There, everyone doesn't always see everyone. We're looking at the backs of heads and we're really orienting ourselves towards seeing the people leading. But on Zoom, everyone can see everyone. So how can you use this unique context for something original for the way in which you're gathering? I think of it as simple as this. Celebrating communion on Zoom, I think is one of the most meaningful ways to celebrate communion, period. Maybe aside from if you can have enough space where everyone can be in a big circle. But what I love is the everyone sees everyone aspect. I think it is such a beautiful picture to see everyone holding up their elements together. Their bread, their juice, their cracker, their milk, whatever you're using. where we all get to see this sea of faces sharing this moment through this digital space? Or how many of us had to do some sort of an Ash Wednesday service on Zoom? I developed the one we did at Riverside this past year, and we were online only, just on Zoom. And so you couldn't, impose ashes on someone through a screen. So we did this thing where everyone had to find dust or dirt in their homes and put it on their fingers and just look at it as a meditation, hold it up to the screen so we could all see the dust and dirt and ash in our lives. And then we saw ourselves feel the weight of those ashes as we imposed it upon ourselves. But it didn't feel like I was imposing it just on myself because I saw you doing it too. But it's using the context of Zoom, the unique ability in which it lets everyone see everyone, and using that to create something original, rather than just being like everyone can see everyone, but really only one person's talking or one person's the focal point. How do you actually use that context to its best potential? Okay, that's the first tip around using Zoom for online church. Second one would be utilize the chat. This is simple, probably. We all know that Zoom has that Zoom chat thing that pops up all the time, but you can use that in intentional ways. You can have the thing happening on screen with someone talking or people having a conversation or leading something, but then you could use the Zoom chat for this kind of other experience. Not so much of a disruptive, vocal interruption where someone might be interrupting the person talking, but it allows for things like, prayer requests. I've seen a lot of churches use it where people put in their prayer requests in the Zoom chat and then those get read in the prayers of the people. How amazing is that already? That, in the moment, someone can say, I want us to pray for this, and then it just happens. Or I've seen churches where during a sermon homily, people can put the quotes or the phrases that resonate with them most in the chat, allowing all of us to have those reminded and brought back to ourselves as the sermon is happening. So it doesn't really disrupt the sermon, but I would say it augments the sermon. That's just an example of using Zoom intentionally for online church. And third, in Zoom, annotations, polls. Oh my! Zoom has all these little tricks and tips and secrets and things that I think are totally worth exploring. If this is your context, learn what it can do. If your room had this, I don't know, if it had a zip line going through your sanctuary, you might find reason to use the zip line once in a while. It's good to know what you have at your disposal. If your church does have a zip line in the sanctuary, can we talk? Okay, back to Zoom. So Zoom annotations, when you share your screen in Zoom, you can then turn on annotations. So everyone in the meeting can write and draw on screen. So it could be something where you have a picture, a piece of art, liturgical art, any kind of art, and you have people identify the parts that connect with them most. I've seen people do Bible studies where they have the scripture on screen, sharing your screen to show, just the Bible verse. And then people can highlight areas, or they can circle things and ask questions about it. And suddenly in real time, everyone together is having this, participatory experience because it's just built into the platform. Or I said polls. These might be a little more common. You have to set these up on the back end, the website, but then it allows people to have that kind of engagement, just answering questions, but seeing the kind of results in the room. The point of this is use the space with what the space gives you. Don't just try to take what you're used to doing and plop it in. Learn this environment and figure out what unique things it can do. That to me is the move from church online. Church online was just, that whole, it's the location in which it happens, but we move to online church. That is when we start suddenly building and leading and conceiving the thing from the ground up. So that's a few thoughts on Zoom. What about on YouTube or Facebook Live? This is also where a lot of us might spend our time with this online stuff we do for church. They're quite different as platforms, but here's what I would say. For the first one, be intentional about making your online church experience on YouTube or Facebook. Be intentional about making it active and not passive. What I mean by that is, by nature, Facebook Live, YouTube, they are much more of a broadcast experience than Zoom, which is a group meeting experience. Zoom is designed as, everyone in one place sharing that kind of business meeting kind of experience. We've used it for church really well. But YouTube Live, Facebook Live, they're really great at kind of broadcasting out what's happening. So it can default to being a passive experience for the online person. It can be kind of like, okay, just sit back and watch it happen, or like I'm peeking in and watching church through the window. So the question is, what are you doing to make it an intentionally active space for those online participants? Lots of things you can do there. Number one is, you can like direct them to live chat. That kind of stuff is built into those platforms as well. You can just be intentional about talking to them, which I think is actually number two. Oh yeah, talk to the camera. Number two. This is a very important and easy thing using these platforms for online church. Don't just talk to the people gathered in the room all around you, but spend some time talking to the camera like this, because that is actually a part of the context of YouTube, of Facebook Live. It's typical when we live stream our Sunday morning in-person service. Now we're talking the whole hybrid thing here. You're really talking to the people in the room, and there's cameras set up to capture it. Okay, that makes sense. But the context of Facebook Live and of YouTube videos, it's this. It's people looking into the camera, talking to the person who's watching the video, giving that direct and intimate conversation. So I think it's important that we do that intentionally in our online spaces as well. Not to mention, it just makes the person feel so much more connected to it. I think a good example of this would be things like Jimmy Fallon and Seth Meyers and those talk shows and things, Lily Singh, where there's a studio audience there, and there's times when they're talking to the audience, but there's a lot of times when they're just looking into a camera and they're talking to the camera because they know that their first audience in those moments is the people watching online. So, simple thing, I think you can talk to the camera. And third and last, for using YouTube and Facebook Live for online church, I think you can chat back. It's not just a matter of a one-way conversation, where, okay, person in the room talks to the camera, person online talks to the robots, and no one ever gets to interact. Can you actually have the two spaces overlap? I've seen some churches where they will have their laptop or their phone here, and they're seeing the conversation happen, and then they respond to questions. They actually address them on camera that just came in here, or at least having someone who's responding back in the platform itself. Do whatever you can to not just copy and paste what we're used to doing into this online space, but how can the gathering grow naturally out of this new context called online, digital, internet? So yeah, that I think is, to me, the difference between church online, where church is happening, and online church, how church is happening. This was necessary for a time, but I hope we move to a world where there's a whole lot more of that. What do you think? Questions, comments? Put them down below, and then come back next week. We'll have another conversation about something related to how to do online church. Notice how we say it, how to do online church, not how to do church online. That's on purpose, because that little thing makes a big difference. All right, I'll talk to you next time.